So here we are. Thank you. Is your mic on? My name is Yuri Mason, and I'm here today with Mohammad Salemy. Mohammad, you are an independent New York-based artist, critic, and curator who holds a master's degree in critical and curatorial studies from the University of British Columbia. I won't go through the whole CV because it's also in the booklet. But you're also one of the organizers of the new Center for Research and Practice, which focuses on accelerating academia, equalizing knowledge, and shaping the future. That's fascinating. And we'll get into that, and that's why I wanted to mention it. Thanks for being with us, and to follow up on what's been said, we will talk a bit about the spatial and temporal dimensions of contemporary warfare. Now, all of this is essentially connected to one event that was brought up already, and an event which we see behind us. September 11th, 2001. Terrorists hijacked 4 airliners, 2 of which were flown into Manhattan's World Trade Center. 1 was flown into the Pentagon, and a 4th plane headed for Washington that day crashed in Pennsylvania after passengers overpowered the hijackers. Over 300 people died that day, and in your work, which we haven't seen yet, but we will, this event is central. It's point of departure. Would you care to take us a bit into the background of your work and also explain what we'll see in a moment?
So what I did was I actually prepared like a little like casual text to read, because I think like lots of stuff would have like I've forgot to talk about them if I just like improvise. So I'm just going to read this, but it's not too long, and then we can discuss.
If it's too long, I'll just interrupt. So
yes,
go ahead.
Interrupt me. The work reconstructs from video archives the televisual unfolding of September 11th on 2 different networks known for representing, at that time, the liberal and conservative political spectrums. Not so much today, because Fox and CNN are now almost identical. The CNN and Fox footage used in the piece start with the mundane morning shows on the networks minutes before the global media landscape was punctured with this enormous historical event, and continues on uninterruptedly and simultaneously until minutes after the second tower is pulverized and fallen to the ground. The duality of the work emphasizes a few doublings. First, the identical ontology of the towers as a thing that already comes with its own identity. Second, the duality of the attacks and their tragic consequence, which resulted in the collapse of both buildings, but also the more relevant doubling that pertains to the relationship between an actual physical event and its coverage on the media, in this case of its live broadcast coverage. 9/11 marks the manifestation of a tectonic shift in the tertiary state of media, political, and economic regimes. I borrow this term, an idea, from Gilles Châtelet, who in the late 1990s predicted a world in which media, capital, and state, just to use examples, Google, Goldman Sachs, and government, become so integrated and indistinguishable from each other. 9/11 also marks the sudden manifestation of slower shifts that could be rooted in the end of Cold War a decade earlier. Basically, the cybernetic governance of world affairs by what we can describe today as the global neoliberal Northern Alliance. 9/11 was also the literal navigation of humanity at large, from televisual networks to telecomputational networks, from centralized welfare states to full-blown market state, and the entrance of the world into a new geopolitical reality. The United States, meaning the same force that was for decades actively behind the establishment of treaties on international relations, suddenly going out of its own way to undermine them, giving rise to the replacement of classical military strategy by Pentagon and its allies with what the exhibition title aptly suggests as asymmetrical warfare. Every media regime offers or tries to enforce its own particular way for how the so-called individual subject and intersubjective collectivities collect, sort, and use memories. Televisual consciousness and intersubjectivity, which we can argue saw 9/11 as its apex, which was soon declined later on, itself was an upgrade from and a link between the pre-television cinematic intersubjectivity, and the emerging network intersubjectivity of the internet. As a work about media studies, the televised events in this exhibition provide a great case for studying how the mediatized live events intervene in the formation of history through self-inserting as a virtual reality into a collective member's individual real physical reality by bootstrapping itself to the very fabric of ordinary life. Just like how in the beginning of the footage, you see like a regular mundane TV footage and how all of a sudden this event kind of like takes over and becomes a reality. Non-live media recordings of events differ from live ones because they are inevitably representational, whereas the self-proclaimed simultaneous live broadcasts of unfolding events tend to obscure their ontology. What we saw on the morning of 9/11, for those of you who were like old enough and alive who saw it, wasn't the event or even its representation. What this work hopes to suggest is that as the towers were going down, two other towers were being erected. Similar to how the differences between a tool and a thing are described by Heidegger, the physical destruction of the buildings as utility was the starting point for the construction of the towers as a mysterious thing. This media footage was the beginning of this constructive process. The towers' destruction as a thing gave context to all sorts of legal, political, and psychological shifts in the character of America as a nation state. Just, we're not going to talk about the whole globe. America as a leading global power, and the subjectivity of people from around the world who also witnessed it. This footage substantiated the realness of the global enemy we now call global Islamic terrorism, from its Al-Qaeda dates to its contemporary manifestation as ISIS. Also, the so-called live broadcast showed how temporal synchrony of people watching the same unfolding events and producing similar memories creates a common experiential context which can then be seized upon for the creation of political, social, and ideological meaning. Like observing physical reality as a group, the media intersubjectivity is a precondition for sudden shifts in hegemony.
Thank you. Whew. Thank you. So what we see will be two monitors, one with a broadcast of the 9/11 footage by CNN, correct? And the other one, a broadcast by Fox News. And this sense of simultaneity that these monitors produce is something you are very interested in. And then the title of the work is a URL, which basically spells out where were you on 9/11, correct?
Yes. If you use your microphone. The title of the work is the URL for when you search for what were you doing on 9/11, which is if you just put what were you doing on, the first option is 9/11 anyways, because most people searching for the terms what were you doing on are searching for what were you doing on 9/11.
What were you doing on 9/11?
I was actually home, and then my neighbors called me at 6 a.m., a polite Canadian neighbor, saying like, can we come over and watch some TV? And I was like, it's 6 a.m., what do you want to watch? And then politely explained to me, a plane has gone through the World Trade Tower. So then I immediately picked up the phone and called a friend of mine who was a curator at the Belkin Gallery in Vancouver at that time, and told Scott that, hey, this has happened. And then through him, the entire like art community of Vancouver kind of got up early and watched the second one live on TV. So they always tell me it's because of your phone call that we all watched the second one live. Otherwise, we would have missed it because nobody really wakes up in the West Coast 3 hours that early to watch TV. So that's really, so I watched the sort of like, I clued in as early as when they were like saying like, we're not sure what's going on here. We don't know if this is like intentional or not. And then right away, if you switch to Fox News, Fox was already saying this is a terrorist attack and we have to go to war. So there was already this like different opinions being formed on these two different networks, whereas CNN did not want to draw a conclusion and was waiting to hear more about it. And Fox was already talking about like, this is a terrorist attack and this is a Muslim terrorist attack and we have to go to war. And that's kind of like on the monitors, except this sound is not part of what it is. So, but the videos, I'll make them available online after the show or something so people can actually listen to the soundtrack too.
And in this event, you kind of track or you pinpoint the shift in three regimes. One, a philosophical regime, second, a media regime, and the third, a political regime. That's, shall we expand a bit on this media regime which you have been talking about? Is this shift from symmetrical warfare to asymmetrical warfare parallel to a shift also in media regimes, or?
Well, maybe not perfectly parallel, but these developments happen around the same time. Actually, I was going to answer your question, like, what was I doing generally during that time of 9/11? It's like a lot of my friends and people, we were all excited about getting high-speed internet. We were like the first people who actually got it. And we were downloading a lot of movies and music from Napster and that. So I remember that's another thing that was going on. It was like I immediately went to my machine to stop downloading and getting on CNN and try to see what is being put on internet, because I was going to compare the TV with what was on internet. And then the CNN server had actually crashed because they didn't accept that many people going on and actually was not showing anything. So then it was like, okay, back to download, and then I got back to TV. So it kind of like, to me, that moment like signifies sort of like the last big hooray for television, where like everybody was kind of like, majority of people were still getting their information from television, and we haven't switched. For YouTube was not even launched. YouTube was launched in 2006, right? So the idea of watching video online was kind of like something we talked about that is going to become available, but it wasn't available, especially live video, which actually didn't become available even more years later on a mass scale, right? So this shift is, and it's not like this shift happened. It's just that it became apparent. We became aware of it, or it reached a critical mass, because these kind of changes between the sort of like a linear media to like more network media was already happening, but it kind of like came to the surface. And actually, the networks themselves are kind of like, they kind of look like internet, like, because most people were just like channel surfing from different channels, so almost going to different websites to see what is Fox saying, what is BBC saying, and so it was kind of like already we were saturated with so much televisual data that it functioned as like computer, but it just didn't have input. It was all like receiving.
Well, on the other hand, you said that this evolution of media or of technology is happening, but and it's not influenced, but the political agency behind it is influenced, right? You said it took Fox News how long before they started imposing meaning on those images?
I think it was like within the first 10 minutes they were ready to speculate on the political nature of the event, whereas CNN was not ready to make that call. So they were ready. They were already putting meaning into it. And as we know, usually whoever sort of like give meaning to this sort of like unfolding experience is the one who get a chance to kind of define it in the longer term, right? So that's how they seized upon it. While the liberals were kind of like in a frenzy of like, what is going on? The right was already sort of like using it and utilizing it to kind of like project the kind of world they wanted to see after this, which kind of like became sort of like more and more apparent as the week unfolded. You know, like a quick little footnote to this is that I did this visual study for a paper I wrote, and I did a lot of like research in like newspapers. And what I noticed in like say New York Times was that between Tuesday morning's a special edition, because at around noon the New York Times put out a special, because morning paper did not have anything about 9/11 on it because it was printed at 5 a.m. But around 11 o'clock they put out a special issue that was like had the pictures of the towers, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, there were like fierce debate in the opinion pages of the newspaper as to how America should react to this. And the opinions were varying. People like as far left as Susan Sontag and other people were like coming in and saying like, totally saying things that we would have liked to happen. And then people from the right were arguing that no, we should go to war and we should like use this as a pretext. And by the time George Bush came down to the site and spoke and said this is like, I don't know, I'm going to put up a poster of Dead or Alive and all that, the consensus was made and the debate was shut down, and basically that line, which originally was suggested by Fox News 10 minutes into the event, was adopted almost wholesale as like the strategy to move forward. And those days are very interesting. Those 6 days when the debates were really interesting and really like passionately, people from both sides were discussing how to handle this and how America should redefine its actions and policy towards Middle East and towards the world and all that, but it just took the wrong turn, in my opinion.
So it's a question of mobilizing images for political purposes and related to the possibilities that the media of the moment have, right? And how would you relate that to the internet now? Is that different? Is that?
Well, I'm more optimistic about the internet, because internet, as we know it, came to itself or became popular during those years of like resisting the Bush regime, right? So internet's kind of like coming into this like foray, already comes with a lot of criticality, and that's why you see how social networks are utilized, and how sort of like internet is really where you see mobilization of sort of like alternative political opinions and social opinions about issues, whether it's as stupid as like Nicki Minaj versus like what's her name, Taylor Swift, or Miley Cyrus, or it's like about like Black Lives Matter, or it's about sort of like the mobilization around like Jeremy Corbyn, which was sort of like today was announced as sort of like the possible winner of the race in England. These are all happening because of the kind of like how left and progressives kind of like seize the internet. But I mean, there's dangers about losing it because of all the legislation that are coming, and how corporations are sort of like slowly taking over, or even what the previous conversation was about, you know, WikiLeaks, or like Snowden and all that, or like what Glenn Greenwald's doing. It'd be impossible without the internet.
Because it also feeds into the third and final regime you mentioned, the regime, kind of a shift in the philosophical regime as well. Question of how we think about the intersubjectivity of people and maybe of things nowadays as well. And the question of how new computational systems of knowledge, or how the internet itself is a computational system of knowledge. How do you see that in relation to the development of art and media?
I don't know how much time do we have left, because we have 5 minutes. That's great. As we were discussing it before the event, this is like a moment of sort of like, we're in a very interesting moment, because a lot of like philosophical baggages from 20th century are being sort of like critically examined and questioned, and sort of like computers are both not only are a tool, but they're kind of like becoming a model through which we're looking at them to understand how human mind works, and how sort of like there's a parallel between networks and computers, and then sort of like Earth ecology, and then human society, and to me it's a very exciting moment, and a lot of these developments will have to somehow sort of like find its way through to academia, because academia, our humanities academia is still kind of like stuck in the 20th century paradigm of like, whether it's post-structuralism or classic Marxism or whatever it is. And these new types of knowledge, I think, will eventually penetrate and kind of like become more available and more mainstream. And I think it will have an emancipatory effect on the society. So I'm actually kind of like optimistic about the future. But I think, as you were saying, it's all about sort of like recognizing future as something that we're able to influence and build and manipulate. Not necessarily exactly to our plans, but future is sort of like through a process of risk-taking and using what we already know about the world, we can actually intervene in the future. And actually the link to the images and what I was saying at the end is that this is, for me, good art does that. Good art doesn't just either like reflect on some problem or the world, or in sort of like how a lot of like art historians see, anticipate a new trend, like how these two roles for the artist, right? Either the anticipator or the reflector, right? And actually good art can intervene and kind of like be like, act as like how these images were hijacked by the right. We can make new worlds by what we make and what we say, rather than just reflect upon it or anticipate things.
Art not only as a mirror to hold up to society, but also as a hammer to shape it.
Yeah, like a hammer made out of mirror, maybe. So you have to be careful with it, because it can break too.
There's a little Brecht quote there. Mohammad, thank you. Thank you.